What would you do if the person you loved most betrayed you in the worst way? For Mark Wallace, the answer was simple: disappear, turn the tables, and make them regret ever crossing him. Long before Mark became the powerhouse behind his warehouse empire, he was just an ordinary kid from a middle-class family with big dreams. His parents ran a small, neighborhood grocery store, and it was there that he got his first taste of business and responsibility. Every morning before school, Mark was up early, helping his dad unload deliveries, restock shelves, and take inventory. His father always emphasized that business wasn't just about numbers, it was about people. Customers weren't merely sales, they were relationships. That mindset would stay with Mark for life. His work ethic stood out as soon as he entered the workforce. At Tim's Electronics, where he started as a fresh-faced engineer, Mark was eager to prove himself. Within a few short years, his hard work earned him respect and the trust of the company's owner, Dale Tim. Dale recognized Mark's potential early on, even mentioning the possibility of a future leadership role. But Mark's vision stretched beyond climbing the corporate ladder. He saw an opportunity in a niche market. Many businesses, especially those handling perishable goods, were struggling to find effective storage solutions. Mark was struck by the idea of building a company from the ground up to address that need. That dream consumed him, but he wasn't alone. His wife, Willa, was his strongest supporter. She encouraged him to take the leap, even when it meant leaving a stable, well-paying job. In those early years, they faced tight finances and skeptical investors. They spent countless late nights together, strategizing and cutting expenses wherever they could to keep the dream alive. There were moments Mark doubted everything, times when failure seemed inevitable, but Willa's unwavering belief in him gave him the strength to push forward. Slowly but surely, their perseverance paid off. One big contract led to another, and soon, Mark's company began to thrive. Wallace warehouses expanded rapidly, and with each new achievement, their financial security improved. It seemed like all their sacrifices had been worth it. But along with the business's success, other changes began to creep in. The bond between Mark and Willa, once so strong and full of shared ambition, began to fray. Willa, who had always been his confidant, grew distant. The deep conversations they used to share every evening became shorter and more superficial. The warmth between them, which had once been a source of comfort and inspiration, started to fade. Mark chalked it up to stress. After all, they had both been consumed by work for years. Maybe they just needed time to reconnect. What he didn't realize, however, was that while he had been busy building an empire, something else, something crucial, had slipped away. Willa had been slipping away from him, and Mark Wallace sat at his warehouse office, grappling with a painful and undeniable truth: his wife was cheating on him. The evidence left no room for doubt. He had always trusted her implicitly, never imagining that betrayal would enter their lives. But now, the weight of that betrayal pressed down on his chest, suffocating in its intensity. Willa worked as Dale Timmons' personal assistant at Tim's Electronics, a leading company in electronic controllers. It was a place Mark knew all too well, having started his career there before leaving to pursue his entrepreneurial dreams. It was also where he had met Willa. From the moment he first saw her, he had been drawn to her sharp mind, boundless energy, and magnetic presence. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, but there was something captivating about her, a charisma that made her impossible to forget. Mark had pursued her with unwavering determination, and after years of dating, they married, believing they were embarking on a journey of shared ambitions and dreams. Starting his warehouse business had been a leap of faith. He recognized a growing market for both dry and refrigerated storage solutions and decided to go all in, risking everything for the chance to build something of his own. Willa, though cautious, had stood by him, helping to cut costs and weather the storm of those difficult early years. Together, they endured sleepless nights and financial strain, pushing forward despite the odds. Their sacrifices paid off. By the time he was 35, Mark had built a thriving business. He owned 4 expansive warehouses and had recently acquired a 100-acre property to support further expansion. His company had become a game-changer in logistics, with refrigerated facilities capable of flash-freezing fresh meat for direct shipping, an innovation that saved both time and labor. Mark was even on the verge of landing his biggest deal yet, a long-term lease with a major retailer that could solidify his empire's future. From the outside, Mark and Willa appeared to have it all: success, financial stability, and a life built on years of hard work. But beneath that facade, cracks had begun to form. The woman who had once been his fiercest ally now felt like a stranger. They had once faced every challenge together, side by side. Now, that connection had faded. Willa had continued to excel at Tim's Electronics. Her role was vital to the company's operations, and Dale Timmons relied on her completely. Confident and athletic, Willa carried herself with an undeniable presence. She had always drawn people in, and at work, she was seen as indispensable. Early in their marriage, she and Mark had agreed to delay having children until their finances were more secure. But now that they had achieved that stability, Mark was eager to take the next step and start a family. Willa, however, seemed to have other thoughts. Whenever he brought up the topic, she brushed it off, avoiding serious discussion. It stung more than he wanted to admit, especially since they had once picked out baby names together with excitement. In recent months, Mark's instincts told him something was deeply wrong. Willa's behavior had subtly shifted. She was more guarded, and though she never left any overt clues, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. His suspicions began to center on a coworker at Tim's Electronics, a man who also had 3 kids and worked closely with Willa. They traveled together for work, spent long hours on projects, and had plenty of opportunity. Willa was careful, too careful. She always answered his calls and kept up appearances, but Mark's gut told him the truth. And now, here he was, staring into the harsh reality he never thought he'd face. The woman who had once stood beside him through sleepless nights and endless sacrifices was now at the center of his greatest heartbreak. Feeling overwhelmed by the betrayal and the need for answers, Mark reached out to Security One, a private investigation firm. He met with its owner, Chris Couples, and explained his suspicions about Willa's infidelity. Chris was professional but direct, advising Mark not to use any business funds for the investigation to avoid complications. Mark agreed, determined to keep things discreet but effective. He needed the truth, not just for peace of mind, but so that it would be undeniable when finally exposed. The next morning, Mark woke up feeling strangely calm. For the first time in weeks, the fog of anxiety and doubt had lifted. He smiled faintly as he looked at Willa, still asleep beside him. While getting dressed, he made an effort to sound upbeat. "Thanks for last night. I feel great." Ready to move forward, he said cheerfully. Willa stirred but looked puzzled by his sudden change in mood. Over coffee, he kept the act going, casually announcing, "I've decided to move ahead with the new warehouse." Willa frowned, clearly taken aback. "I thought you were waiting for the retailer's decision." "They're hesitant," Mark replied smoothly. "But I can't sit around waiting forever. It's time to push ahead." Throughout the day, Mark maintained this facade of optimism and focus. To his surprise, Willa seemed to respond positively. For the first time in months, she initiated affection, which only fueled the bitter irony that simmered inside him. He knew the investigation had already started, and soon he would have clarity. Yet, outwardly, he played the part of a devoted husband as if nothing were wrong. At the Tim's Electronics spring party, his suspicions deepened when Willa predictably disappeared with Dale Timmons. Mark didn't flinch or react. He was beyond giving her the satisfaction of a confrontation driven by jealousy. Instead, he focused on his next steps. The foundation for his new warehouse was already being laid, both in business and in his plans to reveal the truth. Late one night, alone in his office, Mark contemplated how far he was willing to go to protect what he had built. He knew that every move had to be calculated. He wouldn't allow himself to lose control, no matter how painful the betrayal was. Everything had to be done methodically, with the precision that had driven his business success. The days passed, filled with orchestrated plans and meticulous preparation. Mark ensured everything appeared normal on the surface. He went all out for Willa's upcoming birthday, arranging for lavish catering, an extravagant cake, and an expensive gift. He wanted this moment to be unforgettable, not for the reasons she expected, but because the facade would soon come crashing down. As construction crews prepared to pour the warehouse foundations, Mark finalized his own symbolic groundwork. One night, while Willa slept, he left her a short, cryptic note on the kitchen table. "Willa, I was called away on emergency business. Enjoy your birthday. We'll celebrate when I return." There was no signature. Just like his trust in her, the warmth and familiarity were gone. Mark knew the pieces were now in place. Soon, everyone involved would be forced to confront the reality he had carefully uncovered. Mark carefully placed an envelope containing damning evidence of Willa and Dale's affair inside his office desk, knowing it would be found in due time. He made sure to leave subtle yet incriminating clues, smeared blood droplets nearby and a small blood-stained plastic sheet tucked discreetly in a drawer. These breadcrumbs would serve as bait for the investigators, guiding them to the narrative he had set in motion. A few blocks from his warehouse, Mark flagged down a cab. He instructed the driver to let him off near the new construction site but made sure to walk nearly 2 miles from there to avoid leaving a clear trail. Once he arrived at the site, he strategically allowed a few drops of his own blood to fall into the drying cement, planting another deceptive piece of evidence. He then walked several more blocks before checking into a roadside motel, paying in cash. He planned to lay low for at least a week, just long enough for the trap to fully spring. By the following afternoon, the plan had taken on a life of its own. News reports announced Mark Wallace's sudden disappearance, and both Willa and Dale were named persons of interest. Sitting on the motel bed, Mark smirked as he listened to the broadcast on a dusty motel radio. Everything was going exactly as planned. But there was one complication: his face was everywhere. News stations and newspapers plastered his photo on every screen and headline. He needed to stay hidden and alter his appearance. Growing out a beard was the first step in blending in. For the next week and a half, Mark kept a low profile, avoiding public places and staying holed up in the small, remote cabin he had rented under an alias. The media frenzy intensified with each passing day. One evening, as he mindlessly flipped through TV channels, he froze upon seeing a live press conference. The district attorney stood behind a podium, delivering a statement to the press. Mark had missed the beginning, but the most critical part was unmistakable: both Willa and Dale had been formally indicted for homicide. His heart raced as he quickly pulled up the digital version of his hometown newspaper. The front page headline confirmed the news: Willa and Dale were being charged with his murder. Mark leaned back in his chair, stunned yet satisfied. The plan had unfolded flawlessly, with even local columnists writing scathing editorials condemning betrayal and infidelity. But as the initial rush of victory wore off, a sobering realization hit him: what would happen when he returned? Could he be arrested for fraud, obstruction of justice, or worse? He couldn't leave things to chance. Mark knew he had to act swiftly to regain control of the situation before law enforcement realized they had been manipulated. Disguising himself further with new clothes and a hat, he took a bus to the nearest city and bought a prepaid phone with cash. When the store clerk asked for ID, Mark quickly spun a convincing story to deflect suspicion. With the phone in hand, Mark placed a call to a trusted ally, keeping the conversation brief. He was fully aware that authorities might trace the call, so he kept moving, blending into the sea of pedestrians on the bustling city streets. As he boarded a bus and dropped cash into the fare box, he noticed a patrol car cruising by, its officers scanning faces on the sidewalk. Mark remained calm, his voice steady and deliberate as he continued speaking quietly to the detective on the other end of the line. Every step of the plan had led to this moment, and now, he needed to make sure he came out on top without facing criminal repercussions. "I assume you've already sent units to track me down," Mark said quietly over the phone, his gaze fixed out the window of the bus. "I won't resist if they catch up, but I'm not turning myself in just yet. The DA's just doing his job, following the evidence. He'll spin this in his favor if I give him the chance." He paused, watching the streets blur by. "I wanted her to wear the scarlet letter," he added darkly. "When the time's right, you'll handle the filing." On the other end, Mark's lawyer let out a sharp breath. "You really went all in on this, didn't you?" Mark didn't hesitate. "I want Dale served with alienation of affection papers. If his company has a non-fraternization policy, I want that enforced. He shouldn't get away with what he did. He's going to pay for sleeping with my wife." The lawyer jotted down the details as Mark continued. "And I need someone to manage the media when I come back. No questions about the affair, the party, or my disappearance. I want total control of the narrative." They went over more specifics before Mark's phone buzzed with another call. "Kelly." Reluctantly, he answered. She spoke hesitantly after a brief pause. "I wish you'd just talk to her, Mark." Mark let out a bitter laugh. "Why? So she can try to justify everything?" "No thanks. She's falling apart," Kelly admitted. "Her family disowned her, not just because of the affair, but because of the homicide accusation. She's got no one, Mark. She even called me yesterday, panicked. She's convinced Dale had you, liquidated and set her up." Mark exhaled, shaking his head. "I get it, Kelly. But I didn't do this to ruin her completely, I just wanted her to know what it feels like. To humiliate her for what she did to us, to our marriage. We built that business together. We sacrificed so much, and we agreed to wait on having kids. Then out of nowhere, she didn't want any of it anymore." Kelly sighed, clearly conflicted. "She's still getting death threats, Mark. The DA told her to stay in town, and Dale's in hiding too. His business is collapsing. His wife, Gretchen, filed for divorce the moment the news broke, and she got a restraining order. She's not standing by a cheating husband accused of murder." That bit of news brought a faint smile to Mark's lips. Good for her. After their long call, Mark noticed his prepaid phone was nearly dead. He left it charging and stepped away for a few minutes. When he returned, another call was waiting, this time from Willa herself. Her voice was frantic, trembling with fear. "Mark, what's happening?" "I've been getting these calls," she stammered. "Some from your number. Even the house phone. Hackers, I guess. Every time, there's this voice accusing me of homicide. I'm losing my mind." Mark stayed silent for a long moment, then spoke coldly. "Losing your mind, Willa? Maybe now you understand what you put me through." He hung up, letting the silence on her end echo in his ears one final time. "I almost didn't answer," Willa's voice came through, trembling at first. "But Kelly told me you were alive." She paused, as though steadying herself. I started believing you were really dead. That your body was hidden somewhere. I even accused Dale. But there was one thing I knew for sure, I was innocent." Mark opened his mouth to speak, but Willa cut him off. "I don't know whether to be relieved or furious. You did this to me, to both of us." Her voice grew sharper, frustration and confusion bubbling to the surface. Mark let her words hang in the air. He leaned back in the old wooden chair of his remote cabin, an ironic smirk creeping onto his face as he glanced at the TV. An episode of The Fugitive played in the background, a story of a man falsely accused, on the run, evading capture. Mark couldn't help but wonder if he should follow a similar path. He still had most of his $10,000 in cash, access to his online banking, and his credit cards. He wasn't some outlaw from the past. He could stay connected through his lawyer, Kelly could keep him updated on the business, and he could even discreetly fly in for meetings, leaving before anyone noticed he had ever been there. By morning, he had made his decision: he wasn't going to vanish entirely. He would control how and when he returned, but he wouldn't remain a ghost forever. As events unfolded, Dale's life crumbled even further. His name was now synonymous with scandal, and the SEC began investigating him for financial crimes. Eventually, Dale vanished, leaving Willa to fend for herself. She fought hard during the divorce proceedings, demanding counseling first, then later, a significant share of Mark's business. But Mark's lawyer swiftly shut that down. Willa was entitled to receive a portion of the profits as part of the settlement, but she had no authority to tear down the empire Mark had built. In the end, she got the house, the cars, and everything inside, an expensive outcome, but one Mark was willing to pay to finally cut ties. Meanwhile, Willa tried to reach out again. One evening, after several unanswered calls, she finally found him willing to listen, if only in silence. "Mark," she began hesitantly, "I need to say something." He remained motionless, barely acknowledging her words. "Dale and it wasn't because of anything you did wrong," she confessed, her voice low and apologetic. "We worked late, had dinner together, and things escalated. It wasn't planned, it just happened." Mark showed no reaction. He quietly picked up a notepad and jotted something down, not even looking at her as she continued. "It wasn't about him being better than you," Willa added after a pause. "It was just different." She exhaled heavily, almost as if the weight of those words would bring him back to her. "I still love you, Mark," she insisted, her tone softening. "I want to stay married. I asked for counseling because I believe we can rebuild this. I believe in us." Mark finally raised his head, his gaze cold and unreadable. He wasn't sure which part was more insulting, her attempts to rationalize the affair or the idea that they could somehow undo all the damage with a few therapy sessions. He didn't need to say anything in response. The silence between them spoke louder than words ever could. "I know now how much I hurt you, Mark," Willa said softly. "Please, come home. I made a terrible mistake. If you think things with Dale and me were perfect, they weren't. In fact, I bet life with him would have been worse than anything we had. We can fix this." Mark stood, his expression unmoved. "Maybe you should find another office fling," he said coldly. "That seems to be what you need." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked out. He half expected Willa to chase after him, to continue her dramatic pleas, but she didn't. That surprised him, though he didn't linger on it. He wasn't just walking away from her or the past, he was stepping into a new chapter of his life. At the bus depot, Mark made a call to his attorney. "Go ahead and proceed with the divorce," he instructed, his voice calm and resolute. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of clarity and control. Days later, Mark found himself facing an unexpected twist. At a court hearing regarding his disappearance and false charges, Willa's attorney stepped forward, proposing that Mark be released on bail under one condition, that he remain under house arrest at their former shared residence. The suggestion wasn't an olive branch, it was a trap. At the defense table, Mark stiffened, his jaw tightening as he turned to his own lawyer. He gave a firm shake of his head, silently refusing the arrangement. His attorney rose and responded to the judge, "Your Honor, my client strongly objects to this condition. Given the circumstances, he believes this is an attempt at retaliation. He cannot be confined with his estranged wife." The judge eventually ruled in Mark's favor, sentencing him to a year of probation instead of house arrest. Just like that, he was free to move forward. As soon as he was out of jail, Mark dialed Kelly's number. "Kelly, it looks like I'll be sticking around for a year. Can you arrange for my RV to be brought into town? Also, do we have any corporate housing available?" "Actually, yes," Kelly replied. "I bought a small apartment complex last year. We keep a couple of fully furnished units for clients. Pick one, and I'll take care of the rest. Within hours, Mark was settling into a sleek, modern apartment. That evening, he cracked open a beer and allowed himself a moment to reflect. His journey of revenge and recovery had been tumultuous, but now he had a chance to rebuild on his own terms. In the following weeks, Mark immersed himself in the business, reacquainting himself with daily operations and reviewing Kelly's expansion plans. He approved proposal after proposal, trusting in her leadership. Although Willa was still a co-owner and had to be informed of major decisions, surprisingly, she didn't interfere. The tension between them faded to a distant background noise as Mark reclaimed his life. One day, Kelly surprised him with a personal request. "Mark," she began, smiling warmly, "would you like to be the godfather to my baby?" Mark was momentarily speechless, then broke into a laugh and pulled her into a hug. "Absolutely. I'd be honored." For the first time in a long while, Mark felt grounded, not by the shadows of betrayal but by the promise of new beginnings. Willa raised no objections during the divorce process, but her focus shifted to desperate attempts to mend their broken marriage. She cycled through various tactics, pleading for forgiveness, using emotional manipulation, and even making subtle legal threats to stall the proceedings. Eventually, she suggested counseling, which Mark reluctantly agreed to, though more out of curiosity than hope. At the first session with Dr. Mullen, Willa took a seat beside Mark, but he strategically positioned himself to observe both her and the counselor's reactions. The session began with Dr. Mullen asking them to revisit their early years together, the moments when they first met, their early dates, and the happiness they felt on their wedding day. The counselor searched for any signs of underlying resentment, but the wedding itself was a genuinely joyful memory for both of them. For homework, they were tasked with listing moments when their marriage began to deteriorate. As they left the session, Willa clung to Mark's arm, begging him to return home. He ignored her, walking to his car without a word. At the next session, things took a darker turn. Dr. Mullen suggested they watch a video of Willa's earlier deposition, one Mark hadn't seen until that day. As the footage played, Mark remained composed, his expression unreadable. Willa, however, sat frozen, her hands trembling and her face pale with shock as her own words echoed in the room. Mark paused the video and turned to face her. His voice was calm but cold. "You say the words, Willa, but I know better. You claimed to love me, yet you said that. And now, you expect me to just come back." He turned to Dr. Mullen. "I see no point in continuing this. Willa lives in a fantasy where she's never at fault. She expects me to beg for scraps of affection. She doesn't want a husband, she wants a doormat." The counselor sighed. "Unless Willa is willing to make serious concessions, I don't see how we can make progress." Mark's words cut deep, the final blow to whatever thread of hope Willa had clung to. She struggled to compose herself but pushed forward, desperate to explain. That night, she began shakily, the night of the surprise party. "Dale told me about your plans. We laughed about it. And then." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. "We had sex. In his office. Twice." Mark's face darkened, though he said nothing, his silence more condemning than any outburst could have been. "I knew the police were arriving at the party," Willa admitted, her voice cracking. The fear set in. More officers came, and some of the guests started leaving, but most stayed, watching. One officer pulled me aside and began questioning me about where I'd been that evening. She exhaled shakily. "Of course, I couldn't say I was screwing my boss in his office. But that's exactly what I was doing while you were supposedly being attacked. And I felt sick with fear, with helplessness. I think that's exactly what you wanted me to feel, Mark. And I did." She wiped at her tears, her voice breaking under the weight of her own confession. The speculation, the accusations, and the shame had left her unraveling. But Mark's expression didn't soften. The last remnants of love he had once felt for her were gone, shattered beyond repair. The only thing holding him together was the knowledge that he had moved on. Other women had wanted him, admired him. He had walked away from every one of those opportunities, but not out of regret. He was no longer tethered to Willa's betrayal. Her words only confirmed what he had already accepted: there was no going back. "I even started to wonder if Dale had something to do with it," Willa whispered, her voice trembling. "The police found duct tape and a plastic sheet with your blood in his truck. They kept pressing me about his business practices, about our affair. And I started asking myself, could Dale have hired someone to get rid of you? That insurance policy on your life would have helped him a lot." She let out a slow, unsteady breath, her eyes glistening with despair. "For the next week, I lived in hell. My husband, the man I still loved, was missing. Across the country, I could barely breathe from the anxiety. Then the district attorney went on the news. He said they were taking the case to a grand jury. No one had even declared you legally dead yet, and I was already facing a homicide charge." Her voice broke, a strangled sob escaping as she covered her face, trying to pull herself together. After a long, heavy silence, she finally raised her head, her tear-streaked face a portrait of agony. "Did you hate me that much? Did you really want to destroy me?" Mark remained impassive, unmoved by her grief. "You told me you were alive once," she continued bitterly. "And then you disappeared again. Kelly wouldn't tell me where you were. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some people actually thought you were dead, that I had killed you and was lying to deflect suspicion. I knew you were sneaking into town for business meetings, but you never reached out. Not once. Never even tried to see me." She exhaled, her shoulders sagging in defeat. "At least you left me enough money to keep going. But here you are now, saying you want our marriage back. What does that even mean? Do you want the version where we had a future planned, kids, a life together, or the one where you came home only to sleep after spending your days in your boss's bed?" Mark raised a hand to silence her as she started to answer. "No. You've had your say. Now you listen." Willa shrank back into her seat, her confidence crumbling under the weight of his cold, steady gaze. "You claim you want to be married to me," Mark continued. "Yet you also insist on working endless hours to save Tim's electronics. So tell me, Willa, where do I fit into that? When exactly do you plan to be my wife? Should I expect you to schedule our time together like you scheduled your encounters with Dale?" She flinched, unable to meet his eyes. "Here's a suggestion," Mark went on. "If you're just looking for companionship and warmth at night, get a dog. A dog will love you unconditionally. A dog will be loyal. A dog will forgive you." He paused, then locked eyes with her one final time. "I won't." With that, he turned and walked out. Willa remained frozen, hollow and numb, the weight of his words crushing her from the inside. All she had left now was Tim's Electronics, the company that had consumed her life. But Mark's parting question echoed in her mind: what if the sacrifices she had made weren't worth it? What if no one truly cared? Over the following months, Willa tried to refocus her energy on work. She learned to delegate responsibilities and build a strong leadership team, no longer burying herself in every crisis. Meanwhile, life moved on for Mark. Kelly had given birth to her son, James, and Mark, as the godfather, took the role seriously. Willa had been named godmother and fully embraced it, doting on James and later volunteering to be the honorary aunt for Kelly's future children. Mark found balance between his business responsibilities and his personal life. During his regular visits to oversee company operations, he also made time for his godchildren. He took them on camping trips, visited amusement parks, and ensured they had the childhood experiences he had once dreamed of giving to his own children. Over time, his leadership at the company stabilized, and his bond with Kelly's growing family deepened. Though Willa remained in his orbit through business ties, Mark had fully stepped into his new life, one defined not by betrayal, but by a renewed sense of purpose and a network of people who genuinely cared for him. The version of him that had been shattered by Willa's actions was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and finally free.